Hello and welcome to the 2018 First Year Advising Enrollment webinar. I'm Chris Campbell. I'm the Assistant Director for First Year Advising here at James Madison University. There's several other additional advisors and Jmu staff that are joining us today. I want to go ahead and let them introduce themselves as well, starting with Erin.
Hi, my name's Erin Hawes. I'm the Associate Registrar with the Office of the Registrar here at JMU. Welcome.
And Amy.
Hi everyone, my name is Amy Strite and I'm a Career and Academic Advisor in Career and Academic Planning.
Chandra.
Hi, my name is Chandra Lane and I'm also a Career and Academic Advisor in Career and Academic Planning.
And Marquise.
Hello, I'm Marquise McGee and I'm the Associate Director of First Year Programs. Happy to be here tonight.
And last but not least, Mary Morse.
Hi everybody, I'm Mary Morse and I'm the Director of Career and Academic Planning.
All right, so I'd like to open up to questions. If any students out there have any concerns or things they need to know about, certainly they can either email us at firstyearadvising@jmu.edu or also log into the chat feature and send us questions there as well. I'll start off with some FAQs, frequently asked questions that we have every year. One of the first ones is, students usually ask, how do we plan for classes that we may have satisfied by our AP scores this year, since we won't be able to access our AP scores until July? That's a really excellent question. What we generally advise students to do is, if they're interested in taking a certain course, but they're not sure if they have AP credit for that said course, I would advise students to go ahead and select that course for the fall semester. Now, if at some point when we do receive the scores and you potentially do receive credit for that class at JMU, when you come for springboard, or even if you come to spring before you realize that you have credit for that course, you can go ahead and drop that course and pick up a second, your second selection for that area. It's a lot easier to withdraw or drop a course off your schedule than to pick up one later many times.
Related to that too, a lot of times people are curious about what kind of AP score they would need in order to receive credit. And there is a chart for all of the AP credit information linked from the First Semester Modules website. In general, you would need a 4 or a 5 in order to receive credit, but there's much more detailed information about each test linked from that page.
So I have a question about intermediate foreign language level. How many classes or credits does that mean? Depending on the major that you choose, if it's an area that requires a foreign language, the intermediate level stands for the 231 and 232 levels here at James Madison University. Now, if you've had at least 2 or more years of a foreign language in high school, this is where you more likely will start is 231 or 232 level. There are several placement exams that we have for a number of our foreign languages, for example, Spanish, German, French, Italian, or some of the courses you can place into. And that placement exam will put you into one of these 2 courses, potentially either 231, 232. If you're very, very strong at that language, then potentially you could place into the 300 level for that area. So it really depends on what your placement exam will be. And then depending on what degree you choose, how many years of a foreign language you'll need. Most students, if they're earning a BA, minimally have to complete the 232 level. Oh, another question. Seems like all the Gen Ed classes are currently full. If classes close, does that mean it's full or be open for freshmen? All the classes will open up for first year students on Wednesday morning. So even though you might be searching this evening or maybe tomorrow morning, you'll see that something is closed. We'll roll all those sections open for students on Wednesday morning at 8:30.
It's also important to note that the class availability is going to change a lot over time. So if you don't see something that you'd like to take that's open right away, make sure to keep trying, because the class availability changes literally by the minute as different students are making changes to their schedules and potentially dropping classes that you'd like to pick up. So it's important to keep taking a look at My Madison as well.
And it's also important to note that your schedule doesn't have to be complete. By the time you hit summer springboard, your schedule actually does not have to be complete until the first week of classes. So you can keep adding and adjusting your schedule as needed.
So I got a question about electives. How do students enroll in electives, and do concert bands at Jmu count as elective credit? Yes, they do, usually for 1 or 2 credits, depending on the ensemble that you're in. And students enroll in electives by choosing courses that do not count for one of the main areas of your degree. So usually any class you take in JMU will break down to one of 4 areas. Either it's a major requirement, a gen ed requirement, or a degree requirement. And if it doesn't satisfy one of those 3 areas, it's more than likely will be an elective. There's another question here. Is it possible to earn a BA and a BS in the same subject at the same time? You can do that if you want. The BA and BS requirements are slightly different. The BA, like somebody asked before about the foreign language, requires a foreign language and philosophy. The BS requires an extra math and a science or social science course.
Now, just to follow up on that question too, when you choose a major, you're going to be asked to select one degree that you'd like to go with that. Several majors already have a designated degree. So for example, if you are going to be an English major, that's always a Bachelor of Arts. Some majors allow you to choose between BA and BS, like for psychology. You can choose between a BS or a BA, but typically you would just be doing one of those for the major that you've chosen.
Thanks, Chandra. I have another question. I've taken and passed the dual enrollment English this year. Does that mean I do not need to take Writing 103? Yes, that is correct. If you have credit for English 111 and 112 from the Virginia Community College system, you will not need to take WRTC 103 for your first year.
And if you're out of state, you could still possibly exempt from that. In either case, JMU needs to receive your transcripts.
So here's a question, maybe Aaron wants to tackle one. How does enrolling on My Madison work?
So students will log into My Madison, and when you get into your Student Center, there's an Enroll button. So you'll select Enroll, and then you'll ensure that you're in the correct term. Some students will have summer available as well as fall. Make sure you're in fall enrollment, and then you can proceed in searching for classes, adding them to your shopping cart, and completing the enrollment process. We have tutorials out on the modules, so please be sure to watch those as well.
Okay. If you have a calc score near the bottom of the range for a class, is it recommended to go with that or go down a class? Many questions about math are closely related to your major, so that's something you'd want to bring up with your advisor either prior to Springboard or when you come for Springboard, because depending on the math that you need in the future for your required major, your advisor will be able to help you out and make that sound decision about whether you should wait or start with that math class in the fall or maybe even in the spring.
With the math classes also, My Madison has certain settings kind of that are inputted behind the scenes that in many cases won't let you enroll in a math class that's beyond your math placement score, either above or below. So you can see kind of what happens when you try to enroll in math classes in My Madison, but like Chris said, that's a great question for your advisor as it really pertains to majors a lot too.
Another question here from Nick. When I signed up for my elementary Spanish class, one part of the class was labeled online and one was not. Did I do something wrong? No, Nick. Some of the classes here at JMU are what we call hybrid classes. So for example, if you sign up for a Tuesday-Thursday class, your Tuesday class may be in a regular classroom with your classmates, but the Thursday meeting may be online. So you might be required to do an online chat or log into a discussion board for your second class meeting of the week. But there are several classes here at JMU with that setup. Here's a question from Kelly. Would you advise against taking one new language and one old language at the same time? Well, I think it would kind of come down to your interest in studying two languages at the same time and kind of your proficiency in learning new languages. If it's something that you really enjoy and you're interested in doing that, I think you could be very successful. Again, you want to kind of make sure that you take the foreign language placement test for your old language so you're placed in the right section. And then for your new language, you want to start out in the 101 section.
One question that often comes up about foreign language, there's many students that wonder if you're required to take a foreign language. And the answer, I think that comes up as a question because in high school, you usually are required to take that. And in fact, your foreign language is part of the reason why you were accepted to JMU. Here at JMU, not all students have to take a foreign language. You're welcome to if you want to, but the only students who are required to take foreign language are students who are getting a Bachelor of Arts degree, because the foreign language is part of that degree requirement, students who are majoring in a foreign language because of obvious reasons, and then there's a couple of majors, international business and international affairs in particular, also have a foreign language component to them just because of the nature of the major and the skill set that you need to develop. So those are the only areas that require foreign language. For all other students, it would be an option if you were interested, but not necessarily a requirement.
All right, a question from Sasha. I want an on-campus job. I've been employed for almost 2 years. I would like to continue working, but with a job that's on campus, how can I do this? We have a number of opportunities for students on campus. A couple of ways that breaks down is depending on your financial aid package. Some students are awarded federal work study, which allows them to apply for certain jobs on campus. Then beyond that, we have what's also called a student employment through JMU. So it's regardless of whether you qualify or not, this is just a job where you work for the university. And many students will do this anywhere between 10 and 20 hours per week. I believe when you come to orientation, there will be a student resources fair that many of your family members will attend, and there will be resources and a contact for student employment at that fair the day of orientation.
Also, there tends to be a student employment fair at the beginning of each fall semester, and there's also a website called JobLink, which is where most on-campus positions are posted for students. So a lot of great ways that you can find a position. There's also, within the student employment website, if there are other students listening in on this webinar who are looking for employment off campus, if you happen to have transportation, the student employment website also lists those positions as well. So we had another question from Juliana. I'm out of town at my appointment time. Should I register anyway, or is it okay to wait until I get back 5 days later? Amy, what do you think about that one?
If you have the ability to go ahead and register, I would get some classes on your schedule as soon as possible, just because it's important to get registered as soon as possible. But if you need to wait, if you don't have internet access or if you're more comfortable waiting until you get back, that's perfectly fine. As I mentioned earlier, the enrollment process is open the entire way until mid-July, and then it opens up again for the entire university at the beginning of August. So there's plenty of time to get into the classes that you need.
Erin, do you want to talk at all about kind of how classes are released over time on My Madison?
Yeah, we actually have released a majority of the classes, but just so all students know, there's a lot of movement throughout My Madison, and the reason this happens is because students change their mind. You may get an 8 o'clock class and later decide that you want to have a 9:30, or you might find a new professor that you want to try or a different topic within the topics course. So you always have the ability to make changes to your schedule. We do recommend always using the swap function after you get classes, but because of the movement that one student makes, as you can probably understand, it'll make a trickle effect, and there are lots of movement throughout the system. So Although we're releasing a majority of our classes for the first round of enrollment with the freshmen, there will be movement along the way as well.
So I have a question about what classes are required for the first semester. It really depends on your major. Each major has an enrollment worksheet that most students will have seen by this point in Module 4 that will lay out the classes recommended for each major. More than likely, all students will choose at least one Cluster 1 course, and Cluster 1 consists of 3 areas: the critical thinking section, which has 6 options for students, which is what includes, for example, philosophy, history, general business, ISAC classes relating to critical thinking development. The second area is communications. So there's 3 options in that section covering public speaking and communication strategies and effectiveness. And then last but not least is the first year writing course, which is our WRTC 103 that students will select. So all students will have more than likely 1, potentially 2 of those, because out of the general education clusters, if you remember the 5 different areas that students need to complete, Cluster 1 must be completed by your first year. So you'll either complete those 3 classes by taking 2 in the fall and 1 in the spring, or 1 in the fall and 2 in the spring semester. And remember, clusters 2, 3, 4, and 5 are by the time you graduate. Only Cluster 1 is in your first year.
I think there's kind of a misconception as well that because of the cluster numbers that Cluster 5 might be more difficult than Cluster 1, for example. But any gen ed class would be totally fine to have on your first semester schedule. So you might have a mixture of Cluster 1, Cluster 3, Cluster 4 or 5, and Cluster 2 as well, along with some major related classes. So the cluster numbers are just to indicate that those classes are grouped thematically, but they're not by order of difficulty.
Okay. I have a question here about why are some classes removed from the first semester psychology worksheet that are listed on the overall Jmu Gen Ed Planner? That's a good question, Blake. Some of the courses that are listed on the Gen Ed Planner, even though they appear there, they are limited to certain majors. So for example, some of our physics courses, chemistry courses, some of the ISAC courses, even some of the maths for the first semester are limited to certain majors only. So the psychology department has decided, rather than put that class on the planner, Blake, and then have you try and get into the course and being rejected, they're going to list the courses that you're eligible for to take in the first semester, along with their recommendations, which for psychology would be Psych 101, a Cluster 1 class, like I mentioned before, and potentially a math course, depending on how you place the math placement exam.
In the same way with that, it's important to know that there are some required classes that you would have to take for a major that are also general education classes, and so those may be also listed for the first semester enrollment worksheet.
There's a question from Samantha. There's only a SCOM 121, 122, 123 at 6 p.m. at the moment. Will there be more times? Yes, we'll be releasing more of those classes in the next 24 hours. So even though you can't necessarily see them right now, those seats will open up by Wednesday at 8:30 in the morning. Oh, here's another question from Kenya. Do we check out in My Madison before summer springboard, or just keep the classes we desire in our shopping cart until then? No, you want to make sure you check out pretty much right away, because that will secure your seat in those classes. Just because you have a class in your shopping cart doesn't necessarily mean that you have secured that said class. You must essentially, in a way, purchase it by checking out at the end of your enrollment appointment, which lasts through July 19th. But I would tell you, if you're registering on Wednesday, make sure you select your classes, put them in your shopping cart, go through all the steps and check out, so that you see that green check next to all the classes, which means you've secured a seat in that class. If you were to just leave those classes in your shopping cart and not check out, that would allow other students to go in and register for those classes. So then if you clicked on the checkout, let's say a week later, what might happen is none of those classes will be available.
I would say the shopping cart is definitely one of the major points of confusion when people are enrolling for the first time. So not only do you want to check out with your classes, but you also want to check out after adding each class. So add one class to your shopping cart and proceed to step 2 of 3, finish enrollment, so that you can, in essence, check out with that class before you add the next one, because failure to do so can mean that another student grabs that class while you're looking.
One of the most common mistakes that I think we see first-year students make is that they load up their shopping cart and they think they're done. And then when they come on campus for summer springboard, they have no schedule and feel very behind. So that's definitely something you want to pay attention to. The biggest area where the shopping cart is really needed is if you're taking 2 classes that are co-requisites, which means that they're required to, you're required to register for them together. For example, if you're taking a science class and it has a lab that's a co-requisite, you need to put them in the shopping cart so that you submit them together. But really, that's the only time where the shopping cart is going to be most useful to you, because so many other students end up missing what the shopping cart means and think that they're done, but they're not. So just be careful of that and try to avoid making that common mistake that we see students fall into.
We have a question from Vanessa. Do you have all the instructors for each class because some are blank? Well, it depends on the major. Some departments will choose not to list the professors in the summer, and they might start listing that in August. Probably a lot of them are already listed, but maybe not all. I would say a large number of our classes are assigned a professor, but things do happen. You know, professors get new jobs, they change jobs. A lot of that times it happens in the summer. So potentially the assignment for a class or 2 might not be solidified as of yet. Erin, do you have an idea on, maybe from registrar's point of view, about professor changes, things like that?
Not per se. What I do recommend is that students, what happens is the departments know they're going to offer a certain section. They may not know exactly who's going to teach that section at this time, but I recommend that you go ahead and enroll for the section if it meets your schedule and your requirements, and then keep watch, and your schedule will be updated with the instructor information.
Thank you. So I have a question from Samantha. After we check out on our My Madison, can we still drop and swap classes? Yes, absolutely. When registration opens on Wednesday at 8:30, you'll have the ability to drop and swap classes all the way through July 19th at midnight. Then what will happen is the system will shut down for a couple of weeks, and then on August 1st at 12:01 a.m. you will be allowed to log back in and drop and swap classes all the way through past the first week of class to the second Tuesday of the semester. So students can change their schedule multiple times over the summer and even during the first week of class. But what I always suggest is that you consult your academic advisor before making any large changes or even small changes to your schedule, because your advisor would know that, oh, well, I'd rather have this class at a different time or do something with my schedule. You want to check with your advisor, because he or she might say, wait, that's something you need. If you drop the class, it'll be hard to get it back. So that's when you want to consult your advisor anytime you're trying to change your schedule over the summer or even in August.
It's also important to keep a full schedule of 5 classes, or for most students that's 14 to 16 credits at any time, and you can make changes within that. And do remember to swap instead of dropping, because that holds on to your seat in one class as you're looking for a new one that might be preferable.
And as you're looking for different options to add and swap, make sure you're also looking at the locations for the different classes. At JMU, it's not possible to get everywhere in 15 minutes unless you have a formal alternative transportation like a skateboard or bike. And maybe there's a bus system that could work for you. But make sure you check the locations and are taking that into account when you're looking at classes.
If you end up scheduling 2 classes that are back-to-back on the schedule, there's usually 15 minutes in between classes. But our campus has gotten more spread out. So it's, many buildings you can get from one place to another in 15 minutes, but there's some areas that might make that really tricky for you to be on time. So as Amy said, paying attention to the location is going to help you avoid some of that.
And there's that wonderful "Can I get there on time" map, I believe is in Module 5. That would be a great resource to use.
So I have a question from Paul. How do I convert dual enrollment credits? What you want to do, Paul, is make sure that the college university that you completed those credits at has sent an official transcript to James Madison University so that we can record those credits on your transcript. Let's see. I have another question from Annie here. If I do not attend Springboard on the 17th of July, will not check out on Wednesday morning, limit the availability of classes if I wait until after Springboard. Yes, I would say you would want to go ahead and check out and make sure you select your courses this Wednesday. If you can't attend Springboard, that's not a problem, but you want to make sure that you have your schedule secured if you're not attending, or definitely before you're attending Springboard.
Your orientation experience changes a lot if you come that day without a class schedule. It's really important, and you get more time with your advisor if you come with a schedule that might need to be modified versus waiting to have your schedule at all.
So a question from Emma here. I'm a biotech major with a pre-med minor. Pre-med says that if it fulfills a gen ed requirement and a prerequisite requirement for medical school, cannot take it the first semester. Well, as a biotech major, in the enrollment worksheets, it will outline what classes you need to take for your first semester, which should include a biology and a chemistry course, potentially even a math course, depending on what placement you have for that class. You should be able to get into that class for your first semester, probably looking at either biotech, Bio 140, and potentially chemistry 131 and lab for that course, which is 131L.
That's also a great question for your biotech advisor.
Mm-hmm. The question, if you're undecided, do you recommend taking as many gen ed classes as possible? Yes, I would recommend that. Again, you don't have to take the gen ed courses in any order per se. Like, for example, finish cluster 1 before 2, before 3. You will take probably 1 or 2 cluster 1 classes, and then as an undecided student, potentially select some courses from the other clusters, potentially 1 from cluster 2, maybe 1 from cluster 5 or 3 or 4, depending on what your interests are. And your undeclared advisor would give you a lot of advice on which way, or depending on which way you're leaning, even though you're undeclared, you're probably thinking of a certain major or two that you might like to explore. So your advisor would be very helpful in kind of making sure that you're taking gen ed classes that will help you towards that area.
The more information, if you're undeclared, the more information that you can share with your advisor about the kinds of things that you're considering and thinking about, the more they will be able to help you identify areas of gen ed that potentially overlap with some of those kinds of programs. You don't have to commit to a major yet, but just knowing where your interests lie may help you more strategically pick and choose which gen eds would help you get started in certain directions. There's a lot of areas of gen ed that are what we consider major blind. They're not affiliated with a major per se, but there's a number of areas of gen ed that actually serve as starting or prerequisite courses for majors. So again, the more that you can communicate to your advisor about the ideas that you have or are considering, the more they can help you kind of keep as many options open as possible.
A question here. How great of a risk are technical issues from adding classes to your shopping cart before enrollment appointment begins? Well, I would maybe refer this to Erin, but I think you should be fine.
Yeah, there's not much of a risk, especially at this point. As freshmen, what we do is we close down the enrollment system to the rest of the university. So freshmen are the only people enrolling at this time. And what we've done is we've saved seats just for this population to be able to use. So therefore, putting classes in your shopping cart is not going to be an issue at this time. Just know that there may be changes in enrollment. So continue to please watch those classes in your shopping cart, and know that once you go through the enrollment process, you may not get everything that you wished for. So be ready to go back and add additional sections to your schedule.
The other thing with the shopping cart that I've seen with my advisees is that sometimes people will put a lot of classes in their shopping cart, and then they kind of get confused about, why was this class here? And maybe I have 2 classes in my shopping cart right now that are fulfilling the same requirement in Cluster 2 Human, for example. And the longer that list of classes in your shopping cart gets, the more confusing it becomes about why you were wanting to take each class and then which combination of classes you'd like to have. So the advice that I give my advisees is often not to really use the shopping cart until right before your enrollment appointment, maybe just in the 20 to 30 minutes before, because otherwise it's going to keep changing and it can be more frustrating and confusing. But really the shopping cart is kind of a way of marking favorites, and you don't have to use it prior to at all if you don't want to.
The longer a class or group of classes sits in your shopping cart, the less effective the shopping cart's going to be. Because, you know, you put things in your shopping cart, but if you do it very far in advance, the enrollment process is going to happen in real time, and what's in your shopping cart is not a reflection of what's available at the moment you hit submit. So just be aware of that. Doing it very far in advance, there's really not as much of an advantage to that.
So by now, all students will have their appointment time posted. It's important to log into your Student Center on My Madison and review the information there, like your enrollment appointment. That means that's the time when you will be allowed to add classes. You won't necessarily have a set appointment with your advisor, and you won't need to come to campus to register. But that just lets you know your enrollment appointment time will start at this day at this time, and that's when you'll be allowed to add classes to your schedule. Like many of you have already done, you can search for classes, review when they are, the professors, days, times, locations. You can even put them in your shopping cart, but until your enrollment appointment starts, you won't be allowed to officially add them to your schedule. Also on Student Center My Madison, if you have completed all the steps and registered for a Springboard orientation date and picked a major, you will also be assigned an advisor, which you should see on the right-hand column at the bottom, just below your picture.
And I just want to clarify, your enrollment appointment is not assigned until you complete your orientation reservation. So if you have not done so, please do that so that we can assign your enrollment appointment to be sure that you're able to enroll.
I think there was a question too about technical difficulties with enrollment. I just want to make sure that, you know, that My Madison does time out if you spend a lot of time in the system and are not active. And so I think it's like a 15-minute time on Enroll, Erin, if that's correct, or I'm making that up. But just make sure that you are active in the system and that you are being aware of that, because you don't want to have everything perfect in the shopping cart and hit that time when at 8:30 in the morning on Wednesday, and then you're locked out.
Good point.
So I have a question from Jenny. I'll be a first-year student, but I have an associate's degree from an early college program. Most of the health science classes are full. Will more be added? Probably not all of the health science classes are available right now, depending on what classes you did complete with your associates. You'll still have more than likely a few first and second year courses to get out of the way. But with your situation, I would definitely reach out to your advisor for some suggestions on what to take later this week when you go ahead and register.
There was also a question, an earlier question about taking a religion class, a Religion 300, and it says, I'm interested in taking this class, but it's not required for the psychology major. Would that basically be okay to take in the first year? And in general, we would probably recommend, there are some other religion classes that are part of Cluster 2. There's God, Meaning, and Morality, there's a World Religions class, and there might be other classes that are a little bit more entry level than taking something like Religion 300 in your first semester. In general, we're looking to see classes with 100 and 200 level kind of course numbers. That's not always the case, but certainly for an elective, we want to make sure that we're not putting something on your schedule that would be too much for the very beginning.
All right, I have a question from Vanessa. How long do you recommend a gap between classes? Because some generated schedules only give me 15 minutes to get from one class to the other. That's generally the break between all classes will be 15 minutes. So if you do have a schedule where you're putting classes back to back, and this only applies when it's back to back. So if you have an 8 a.m. class and then you have a 10 o'clock class, you'll have more than an hour, or close to at least 55 minutes in between each one. But if you have an 8 o'clock class directly followed by a 9 o'clock class, you want to make sure that you have that time in between. And we have the Can I Get There on Time sheet that's available as well that would tell you, can I make it from Miller Hall to Shoker in 15 minutes, which most students can. But if you're going from somewhere like the ISAT side of campus, which is biochem and physics department, and NGO Hall, which is engineering geosciences, over to the quad where most of our liberal arts classes are, like history and English and things like that, it'll be a lot harder for you to make that switch. If you have any particular questions about your schedule, your advisor is a good resource for that, and he or she will be able to answer, well, you can make it in that time frame, or you cannot. You better look for a different section.
One of the things that you're going to notice with your schedule when you come to college is that it's going to be very, very different from what you've become used to in high school. Your high school schedule started, around 8 o'clock and always finished by around 3, and then you had, after school, involvement that you might have had. Here at JMU, we have classes that start as early as 7:30 in the morning and can run as late as 9 or 9:20 in the evening. And so you're likely to have, instead of all of your classes bunched together, unless you plan it that way, you're likely to have classes that are very spread out with bigger gaps of time. And it's going to involve a lot of learning time management skills to really make the most of those blocks of time in working on your schoolwork and your assignments and things of that sort. So it's going to look very different than what you've become used to, but that's normal, on a campus like this. And it's very common for students to have evening classes. That's not unusual at all. It's very common for students to have several hours in between one class and another. So it depends on the classes you're signing up for, but just know that it's going to be a different look and feel to your schedule than what you probably have been used to up until now.
And really with that, know your strengths. If you're not a morning person and it's really hard for you to get out of bed in the morning, maybe that 7:30, 8 o'clock class is not your first choice. On the flip side, if by the time you get to the evening, you're not as sharp and you don't feel like you could perform as well, maybe look for a morning class instead.
All right, so I have a question from Gabby. If I have a dual enrollment course and I have received credit for, does JMU take the credit or the GPA as well? If the GPA is not taken, does that mean that it does not fulfill the cost requirement? Okay, so if you do have a dual enrollment course, we will take the credit, but not the grade for that said course. Even though we are not taking the grade, if the course does fulfill a gen ed requirement, it will count for that said cluster. Again, these are good questions to ask of your advisor. Make sure that you send your transcript to JMU from the college that you've taken that dual enrollment course from. We want to get that posted as soon as we can. If it's something that you've just recently completed, make sure you send an updated transcript. A lot of times what will happen is first-year students will apply to a college. They might have some dual enrollment credit that they completed as a junior or maybe their fall of their senior year, but then they're also enrolled in a spring dual enrollment course. So they'll send their dual enrollment transcript, say November, but then forget to send an updated one. So you're kind of leaving your spring class kind of out there hanging. And without an official transcript with a grade for that spring class, we won't be able to add it to your transcript. So if you've recently completed any dual enrollment courses in the last couple weeks or last month, and you haven't sent an updated transcript, make sure you do that.
So for dual enrollment classes, it's also important to know you need at least a C in that class to receive credit, but then what that looks like on your JMU transcript is that it has a CR, just showing that you have credit next to that class in a similar way as what you would have if you had other credit that you've transferred in. But you do need at least a C to get that.
So I have a question from Amber. I completed and passed English 101, Physics 101, and Physics 102 dual enrollment with Richard Bland. Do these courses count as credit? Yes, they will, as long as Chandra pointed out a few minutes ago, even though you might have passed, you still must have earned at least a C in those said classes for them to transfer to JMU. We have a transfer guide that's hosted by the registrar's office. You go to the JMU website, in the search area, you type in Jmu Transfer Guide. That link should pop up as one of the first or second options. And when you go in there, you can select the area that the course fits into. For example, you'd scroll down and click on physics, and it will give you a chart of all the courses at the Virginia Community College system, what the numbers are, and then to the right of that, in the column, it will list the JMU equivalent. So a question from Sasha. I was always going to be going into college as undecided, but now I'm interested in SMAD, cinematography. Oh, good for you. I'm confused on the application process is not something that you start in the fall. Well, Sasha, if you do want to enter into SMAD, that's something you can declare and choose to do as a first-year student. You could take the introductory media arts and design course, which is the 101. You don't have to do that if you don't want to. You could potentially take it in the spring semester. That's fine. You won't be behind at all. It's just that the application process for SMAD is always in the spring semester. So as you're taking that SMAD course, whether in the fall or in the spring semester, the professor for that said course will go over the requirements for applying to SMAD. And what happens is students will apply to SMAD in the spring only. And what happens is they will find out their acceptance spring break, which is usually the first week of March.
So if you're thinking about different options to further explore majors, we have resources that you can use to explore if you haven't found them already. Our office hosts the career guide that you can go to. Just Google career guide JMU, and all of the majors are listed with a brief description about the majors, any concentrations, as well as different characteristics of successful students. On that page also are different careers that students can engage in after they finish their degree, as well as our career outcomes from past students who graduated in that degree program. Also is the major snapshots, which you can, it's also linked on the first year enrollment pages. But those particular resources for the major snapshots is a really great description of the major, as well as any admissions information about that particular major. And so that would be a great place to link to the SMAD website as well.
And those two resources that Amy just mentioned, the Career Guide to JMU Majors and the Major Snapshots, answer some of the most common questions that we hear about majors, which is, what would I do with this major after JMU, and how do I get into that major if it has entrance requirements?
All right, looks like we have a question from Ryan. Can taking band override any of the visual performing arts in Cluster 2? That's a good question, Ryan. We actually get this from time to time. Unfortunately not. So if you do select marching band, which is MUAP 238, it's actually a 2-credit course, so you receive 2 credits towards graduation for that class. You're able to take that as long as you are here enrolled at JMU, so potentially you can be in band all 4 years that you're here and earn 8 credits for that. But you would still have to take a visual performing arts course for general education.
And a lot of my students who are in the marching band really enjoy the music, visual and performing arts classes because of a shared interest, but you're always welcome to branch out if you have diverse interests as well.
Oh, I'm sorry. MUAP 237 is band. 238 is concert band. 2 different types of band. Sorry, I got that confused there. Also, just want to point out, too, that marching band is a pretty large commitment. Even though you're only earning 2 credits, students will have a schedule with band that will consist of practice Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and Friday from 6 p.m. till 7:30. And even though just want to point this out because talking from experience, even though it says the class is from 6 to 7:30, you probably want to make sure that you have time starting about a half an hour before 6 o'clock to be ready and get over to where you need to be with your instrument. Yeah, because if you're getting out of your previous class at 5:45 to go to your 6 o'clock band practice, it's going to be very difficult for you. Okay, so make sure you build a little bit of extra time if you're taking band in the fall semester.
Now, we also mentioned earlier, too, that for many students, your schedule is going to be 14 to 16 credits. If you're doing marching band, then you might find yourself taking 17 credits, and that's okay, too. If you're considering any of the music ensembles or being a music major, sometimes your schedule will have more credits, but having 17 credits is fine if it's, kind of some of those applied music classes. Again, though, that can be a great question for your advisor if you're trying to decide where your total number of credits should be.
So I have a question from Ani. I've been accepted into Honors College. Congratulations. And the ROOP learning community, congratulations second time. With course requirements for both, it doesn't seem like I have time for gen ed classes. How I make this work? Well, some of the ROOP learning community classes will cross over and count for gen ed as well. And the honors courses you'll be taking will be also count for gen ed. So all first year honors students will be taking a SCOM 123 honors course in the fall. So that will also count as gen ed. But if you have any concerns about how you're going to fit all this in, your advisor would be a good resource for that. Okay, so
I was going to say sometimes for the honors program too, it's important to know that there are some classes that you'll take that are within that department. So for example, Honors 100, but there are also honors sections that you would take of gen ed classes. So it might be SCOM 123, but it has an H at the end to indicate that that's an honors section. So for Ani, who posed this question, those would be some classes on your schedule. And then other students who are listening in right now, if you're not in the honors program and you're receiving an error message because you tried to add a class with an H at the end, that would be why.
Let's see. Okay, so a question from Morgan. I have an AP score that are being sent to JMU that have not been received by JMU. I'm not assuming I should enroll in classes I believe I'll receive credit for. Is that correct? Good question, Morgan. More than likely, we receive our AP credit scores usually at the very, very end of June, if not the very beginning of July. It's been about the same time every year. What I generally suggest to students, and I mentioned this earlier, is that if you want to take a course in the area which you have AP credit, and you're not sure about how close your score was for qualification, which many times it's either a 4 or a 5, we have a few. A very limited number that you can earn a 3 and have credit, but most are 4s and 5s. If you're not sure, I would advise you to sign up for that class. And then when we do receive your score at the end of June, early July, and let's say you do earn the 4 or the 5, which earns you credit, what we would go ahead and do, or as one of my advisors would tell you, okay, let's take that class off your schedule and pick up something else. And again, just want to point out, mentioned before about the number of credits in classes, we're all looking for about 14 to 16 credits for that first semester, which should equal out to at least 4 to 5 classes for the term.
The enrollment does restrict you to enrolling in 17 credit hours during this first period of enrollment, but during open enrollment in August, you can increase that to 19. I would only do that with the support of your advisor and after having a discussion with them. Sometimes that's necessary depending on your major and depending on your circumstance, but it's always great to have a conversation with your advisor.
And I guess on the other end of that spectrum too, we're recommending 14 to 16 credits, but you can also take 12 credits and be considered a full-time student. So if you have a lot of prior credit coming in and you're concerned about your transition to college and what that might mean for you academically in the beginning, it's also okay to talk to your advisor about taking 12 credits, which would be about 4 classes, and, you know, kind of talking about what that would mean for your long-term plan.
So I have a question from Kendra. Is it difficult to possibly major in both international affairs and intelligence analysis, as well as be a member of the honors college? If you're double majoring in both international affairs and intelligence analysis, those are decent sized majors here at JMU. I wouldn't say they're the largest that we have, nor the smallest, but there's a fair number of requirements for both. Right at this time, as a first year student going into orientation, you can only select one of those majors at this time. But what will happen is, as soon as you get onto campus in the fall, the first day of classes, you can add that second major if that's something you want to do. If you're thinking of double majoring, make sure you point that out to your advisor so she can point you to some resources and potentially give you advice on adding in that second major. But if you are double majoring, more than likely your four-year plan will be a little bit longer because of the number of credits required for those two majors. So I would say, just ballpark guessing with those two, you're at least looking at an extra year with international affairs and intelligence analysis together.
I would also really consider kind of what drew you to take both of those two majors and what interests you, and then talk to your advisor kind of about, you know, is this a good plan? What are some other things that I could pair with this as some other resources if you do end up needing to take extra time, but that's not something that you might be able to do or that you want to spend that extra time to do. Because oftentimes you can get some similar experiences, but not have the double major there.
So the catalog can be a great resource with this too, which is just jmu.edu/catalog will tell you how much time any major or minor at JMU would take. And it's important to kind of know the total amount of time for majors at JMU can vary a lot, anywhere from 36 credits to 70 credits. So that means that some majors take almost twice as long as others to complete. So when you're trying to figure out how much free time do I have to do a double major or add a minor, it's really important to look in the catalog and see how some of those things would work together. And then, like Amy said, kind of looking at what was it that brought on some of those interests, and would internships or a related minor or other experiential learning also get you to that same end goal if it means that it's going to take significantly longer than your 4 years.
Another question from Lexi. Do the honors general education courses count towards regular gen ed requirements as well? Yes, they do. And many times those honors courses will be designated with an H at the end of the course. So you might be signing up for an SCOM course, for example. So that course will be listed as SCOM 123H. So you'll know that you're signing for an honors section if that's your intention. I have a question from Chris. What is the minimum amount of credit required for financial aid in general? 12 credit hours is what you want to carry to be fully eligible for financial aid here at JMU. So you always want to make sure that you have at least 12 credits to be a full-time student. Also, too, that will affect some of the other, I guess I would say, benefits or perks of being a student. So it also affects your enrollment at, let's say, UREC, or potentially, depending on the meal plan that you're able to buy, and also your housing as well. So anytime potentially you might be looking at being enrolled in less than 12 hours, you always want to consult with your advisor about that decision. We have a question from Caroline. What time does enrollment open? For most students, it will be Wednesday at 8:30 a.m. That's this Wednesday, the 13th. But you want to make sure you go ahead and log on to your My Madison account and look at your enrollment appointment time. Again, it's not an appointment where meeting with your advisor that you have to come to campus. It just means at that time, when that starts, your enrollment appointment, you'll be able to add classes to your schedule. You can still search for classes and put classes in your shopping cart right now, but you can't officially check out your shopping cart and add classes to your schedule until your enrollment appointment begins. I have a question about Air Force ROTC classes. Will they be available for enrollment on Wednesday on My Madison? Yes, they will. Those will be available on Wednesday.
Some ROTC courses also require travel to UVA. I think that's specific to the Air Force program. So that's also a great question for the JMU ROTC coordinator, or sorry, the Air Force coordinator.
If for some reason those classes are not available in the system, they will get you force added to those classes. I had a student that had that situation last year, so they should be available, but if they're not, talk to your advisor about getting those classes.
I have one more question here from Brooke. Is it okay to enroll in 4 classes first semester to get acclimated to the campus? I think that's something you want to talk to your advisor about. I mean, students can do that. That's the minimum that you want to have is 4 classes for a total of 12 credits. Make sure that you have 12 credits because not all the classes are 3 credits. I wouldn't want you to pick 4 classes and then one of them be 2 or 1 credit, and then you have 10 or 11. We don't want that. But that's something you want to go over with your advisor. I generally suggest to students that they take at least 5 classes, which is 15 credits, because at some point, you're going to get to that load. And also to remember, we're kind of shooting for at least 30 credits every year. You want to make sure at the end of this year that you graduate to sophomore status, as it were. And if you're to take 12 credits in the fall and only 15 in the spring, you wouldn't necessarily be a sophomore in your second year. Because you'd have to get 28 credits to be a sophomore. Let's see here. And just pointing out, kind of coming off that question, if you take a shorter or a smaller number of classes, at some point you'll have to make that up, not during your first year, potentially in the summer or maybe your sophomore, junior, or senior year. All right, so we've come to 8 o'clock. I'd like to thank everybody who's participated. Erin from the Registrar's Office, Amy, Shander, Marquise, Mary, and myself from Career and Academic Planning. This webinar will be live on our YouTube channel for the duration, so please come back if you missed anything or if you kind of joined at the end. There's a lot of excellent questions, things that you might want to know about in the earlier part of the webinar that happened. So it's a full 60 minutes, a lot of good information. And if you could go ahead, if you find that some of your friends are having questions, please refer them to this as well. And we're always available to contact through our email address as well, which is firstyearadvising@jmu.edu, or our phone number, which is 540-568-6555. And thank you. This is Chris Campbell from Career and Academic Planning.